Grow your practice, grow your wealth, grow your impact. Find out how to spend less time in the dental chair and more time on the things you love.
Welcome back to the Dental Wealth Podcast. Eric Morin here, bringing you another week's content. What I wanted to talk to you about today is the idea of, what happened to Payless Shoe Stores. How does that affect dentistry? What should you be looking at when you look at what happened? Now, by the way, I would tell you, as a business person by nature, you want to study business. You want to make business a study. And so when you see things like this happen in the news, you have to ask yourself, why? Why did Payless, a national brand, go out of business? You'd have to ask yourself that question, because I think it's as a business owner, it's important. And what does that have to do with the dental practice? And what can I learn from that? Am I doing something in my strategy? And a few weeks ago, we were talking about a cost leadership model in Aspen Dental and how that works. And so what I want to talk about today is I want to talk about what happened to them, how that affects when I say them, I mean Payless Shoe Stores, why they're closing so many stores, and then what does that do to dental practice, and how you can avoid that, and then what you should be focused on in your dental practice as far as a number that you should be striving towards so that you don't end up in the same situation. So let's just jump right in. So I saw this, and when I saw Payless Shoe Stores going under, I guess they didn't go under technically. They've got some stores internationally, but they're closing down all U.S. stores. Now you got to ask yourself, why would that happen? Here it is. They are what we call cost leadership models. So what they're going to do is they've always opened up these brick and mortar stores, and then all over the United States, they had the lowest cost, right? And so you could go get a pair of shoes, especially if you're getting your kids ready for school. That would make sense for you to go to Payless and get maybe save some money, especially if you have multiple children. Maybe the young professional who is looking for a pair of dress shoes that was maybe coming out of a college and a tight budget. So there was a place they fit in the market. What happened over time is other people started to come into that space and start thinking about that. So there's companies like Zappos, right? Everything started moving online. And one of the things I always argue is if you're the lowest cost provider, the problem is somebody can always go lower. And if we're talking about dental wealth, one of the things I want you to do is, if you listen to this podcast, is I want you to create a thriving, awesome, amazing practice so you can have plenty of wealth, impact your team, your community, those around you. And I'm telling you that if you keep cutting costs, if you let the insurance companies dictate, if you're constantly allowing other people to dictate your price, you're going in the wrong direction. And what Payless did over time, well, that model worked. They were so entrenched in leases and brick and mortar that when everything went online, they didn't own that market space. They didn't adapt to that market space. They were what we call pot committed, right? They were committed to this model. And one of the examples that I give sometimes is that if you look at Kmart was the retailer of the day until a guy named Sam Walton came along and Walmart took over that space. And then everybody said nobody would ever take over Walmart space, and here we are, we have Amazon. So, and you just think about that and say, if I'm going after cost, if I want to be the low cost provider, so I want to do cleanings, exams, x-rays for $99, and I want to try to get the cheapest patient in the door, and I want to get as many patients as possible. The problem is somebody can always go lower. And that model over time is the most susceptible to being eroded as far as your market share. And you got to think about that, especially with corporations coming in. When you have economies of scale, you can tend to go lower. Are you chasing insurance companies right now? If you listen to this, are you letting the insurance company dictate your price and where you're going? Are you focused on the average revenue per new patient or per patient? How much revenue per chair? What I want you to think about as you're listening to this podcast, is that even a focus right now? Is price a focus? Or are you chasing the market? You should write that down. Is price a focus? am I chasing the market, or am I chasing the market? If you think about that, how do you dictate price in your practice? There's a concept of price elasticity, which basically the idea is as long as there's enough value, people will pay more. As long as there's enough value. It's kind of interesting example is that if you look at recently, when we look at hotels, a hotel room is nothing more than 4 walls, a bed, 2 lamps. And yet the St. Regis or the Ritz-Carlton can charge 4 or 5 times much as, a similar type, when I say similar type, I mean for the same 4 walls as a Hilton, right? They can, and by the way, there was an example of this. I was in Toronto a while back, and it was 5 times as much to go to the Ritz-Carlton as it was to get to the Hilton. And by the way, the Ritz-Carlton was sold out. Where do you come up with your pricing? Where do you dictate pricing? Where do you get your pricing from? Are you asking your friends at the midwinter meeting? Are you going to a convention? And the goal is, through case acceptance, through your experience, through your pricing model, you want to be able to push up that average revenue per patient, not push it down. If you're chasing down, you will end up extremely busy. And by the way, some of you listening to this know that. You will wind up significantly busy. I mean, you'll have more patients than you know what to do with. But don't mistake being busy for being productive, right? There's a saying is, that when you look at that activity, busy versus productive, right? Don't just be busy being busy. Busy doing what? So seeing 2 to 3 times as many patients. Now, I understand there's marketing strategies to possibly get some new patients in the door, and I get that. But I'm trying to think, help you think about this from a business model. If I'm chasing low cost, if I'm trying to look at my competitors and underbid them, it's like I was recently working with a surgeon, and he and I were sitting down, and he told me that one person was charging $10,000. It was him and a competitor, and they were saying one of them charges $10,000 for a tummy tuck. And so I said to him, he says, every time if I go to $9,500, he'll charge $9,500, and we keep driving each other's prices down. So I said, here's what I want you to do. Charge $20,000. Watch what happens. And by the way, after this conversation, his business took off, interestingly enough. And yes, he might see less new patients, but because of what he's getting per patient and because of the perceived value of that, now he's added some experience to justify the price point, but people will have a perceived value anyhow. So what I want you to get out of this is that if you're just chasing, right, some price for some, look at what another company is doing, or you're looking at what your competitor's doing, you're making a huge mistake. It's a huge mistake. What you need to be looking at is, how can I increase my revenue per patient? Now that might be adding services. It might be that your experience is so superior that it justifies that. Yours might or might not. It might be that you raise price as a perceived value. Right? There's a lot of ways we can do this. Services, right, make a big difference. Maybe you should be adding services. You've got this facility, and you want to make sure that facility has enough revenue, right? So you want to maximize those opportunities. But it's not by being busy. Don't mistake busy for productive, right? Just because you see 2 as many patients. What I want you to think about is this. Write down the word unrealized revenue. You want to attack unrealized revenue. So, for instance, I would go back and I would take my total revenue and I would look at how many operatories I had. And then I would go back and I'd say, okay, well, how much revenue is that per month per operatory? And I would definitely want to make sure I'm at least somewhere about $30,000 or above per operatory. And if I'm somewhere around 20,000, by the way, that's more typical of what I would see as somebody coming in at $20,000 in operatory. And what happens is they keep expanding. And instead of just maximizing the facility, one of the things that happens today, I think the whole dental and dental DSO, and there's all kinds of buzzwords about multi-location. And so people get so caught up buying buildings and buying practices, and they're running down this road. And it happens so often that people think just because I have another location that I'm making more money, and it's not necessarily true. Maximize your current location. Maximize your current location. I mean, it's just poor capital management for you to start buying up other properties, for you to buy up other practices when you haven't even maximized or come close to maximize your current facility. That's poor capital management. And so you want to become really, really good at capital management, and you want to make sure that you're maximizing your current facility. And that's what I would be doing. I would be making sure I maximize my current facility. And by the way, I wouldn't be doing it by reducing my cost, right? When I say cost, my price per patient. So what we can learn from Payless, when we look at the marketplace, we can look at that and say, look, it worked for a while and it will work for you for a while. And by the way, don't mistake the idea of, hey, I'm doing good today, so I'll be doing good forever. That's probably one of the biggest mistakes you could make. I mean, we could literally sit on a podcast for the next 2 weeks and talk about companies that were successful and that no longer are, right? Just at the top of my mind, one of these ones popped up, and it was like, what about AOL, right? We all remember that American Online back in the 90s was the powerhouse, the juggernaut. How many of your friends have an AOL account today? I think I know one, by the way. So we look at this and say, okay, well, that doesn't make sense. Okay, if we're going to build a growing, scalable business with capital, we're going to have capital to go acquire other practices or acquire the right team or acquire marketing ability. If we're going to do that, then what we have to do is we have to make sure that we're maximizing our facility. So instead of just being busy, now there's all these consulting companies out there that just tell you to grow. But what ends up happening is if you're not maximizing your facility, you're going to end up having thin margins and struggling with cash flow anyhow. So I would argue with you that I would go back and I would calculate, like I was just talking about, I would calculate your revenue per operatory per month, and make sure that you're at least hitting 30,000. If you're not, then I would probably put some emphasis there. And if you're at 30 and say, I'd like to get to 40, how could we do that? And start looking at the different options. And there, by the way, there's a lot of options, but you can start realizing that by reducing my price, if you start reducing your price, it becomes more and more difficult because you have to see twice as many patients, which means you take up chair time to do that, which then means you have to grow the overall facility, which takes up capital that you could be using capital for other things. So it's kind of an ego trip. It's like an ego trip to keep expanding so that you can go to a meeting and say that you have 2 locations or 3 locations, or and then don't explain that you're struggling with cash flow. And by the way, I know a lot of you are struggling with cash flow, by the way. And so I hear the ego thing all the time, and I just want to let you know, grow a massive, awesome, successful business. And by the way, it doesn't, if you're listening to this and you're doing $800,000, and you're like, that's all I want, Eric, is one location, that's great. Let's keep your price point going up and maximize your facility. If you're doing $5 to $7, $10 million and you're saying, hey, look, how do I get to the next level? Still, you want to have great capital management. And when we gave an example, of Payless, but we could look at Toys R Us. We could look at other companies that have struggled when we talk about capital management. Recently, I was told a story of a DSO that went through $5 million worth of capital in 31 days. $5 million of capital in 31 days. And we don't want that to be the case. Just because you get big does not mean you know how to manage cash. So maximize the facility, listen, if we're going to take this practice and we're going to create wealth means a lot of different things, and it means impact and impacting your team and impacting your community, being able to come and go as you want, having scalability. If we're going to have that, then don't chase the low price. Don't look at what everybody else does and say, I want to be just like them. Great companies don't compete. Great companies dominate. Great companies do it different. Great companies look for different avenues. Go become great. Guys, thank you for listening. I hope you have a great week. If you've enjoyed this, if you enjoyed the Done Wealth podcast, hit subscribe. We'd love to have you as a regular audience. Have a great week.